Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be about how to retain texture in your images and my top 6 tips for doing so. I'm going to talk about a couple of tips in post-processing that I find really helps with retaining texture, but also a few tips on the shoot day for when you're shooting and you really want to get the most texture out of your images and in the portraits and on a model's skin tone. So if you want to get texture in your images like these few photos here, then just keep watching. The first tip we're going to talk about today is actually by using the dodge and burn skin retouching technique. So you guys know, if you watch my channel, I always advocate for dodge and burn and I talk about it all the time, but it really is such a great way to help retain texture in your images. It's a very non-destructive form of retouching on the skin, and it will really help you allow the pores in your images and the pores in your portraits and beauty portraits to really stand out on the skin tone. I find that this is the best technique for keeping and retaining the majority of the texture in the image and even enhancing it to an extent. This is why I always recommend this technique for beauty retouching, or even to use in conjunction with frequency separation, but I definitely recommend it for retaining texture in your images and enhancing it as well. If you guys don't know how to dodge and burn, or you want to learn more with that, I've listed a couple of tutorials in the description box below, so if you guys want to go and check that out, you can. Tip number 2 involves using a high pass sharpen method in Photoshop. Now this has been my method of choice for many years for sharpening my images, and in particular my beauty portraits. I find that this is another non-destructive way of editing your photos and really enhancing that texture in the image and retaining it. It is a great way to bring out the highlights as well in the image, and I find that it really helps those pores once again stand out amongst the skin texture. So this is definitely my method of choice when it comes to sharpening, and I also have another tutorial for that listed in the description box below. The third tip I have today for retaining texture in your images is by using a grain. Now this is more of an illusion that you tend to create by using a grain, and I do this to really create that nice soft textured effect across the images. It really helps to give it that editorial feel, like you're almost looking into a magazine and looking at magazine pages at a print. So I really love adding the grain. I think it adds that little bit of subtle texture that not a lot of people notice at first, but it does make an impact, and you will see it across the skin tone, especially as you can see in this quick tutorial. It's very apparent that a grain has been added, so it's one of my favorite ways to sort of keep and retain a bit more texture that way. The next tip I have for retaining texture in your images is to use harder light when shooting. So this is moving more into the photography tips now that I have that you would do before post-processing begins, and you'd be doing this on the day of the shoot. I really recommend shooting with harder light because it really allows the texture to be picked up on camera. It's going to be picking up lots of different details that you won't probably even see on the day, and it's really important when you're using the harder lights to really consider what modifiers you might be using, especially if you're using strobes. I personally love to use a beauty dish without a diffuser from time to time, and I also love to use a honeycomb grid on my softbox, so it will direct the light a little bit more onto the model's face and you're really concentrating that light. It gives a little bit more of a harder effect on the model's face, but as I said, it really does help that texture pop and makes things a lot easier in post-processing. This can also be achieved in shooting in natural light, and the way you would do this is by shooting at times of the day where the light will be a lot harder, so you can shoot at midday, or even if you're shooting within the golden hours or later in the day, earlier in the morning, using full sun to get your photographs. That would tend to really pick up the texture on the model's face. My fifth tip for retaining texture in your images would be to, on the day of shooting, get the makeup artist, if you've got one on board for your shoot, get them to put a highlight or a glow onto the model's skin tone, because this will really help reflect that texture and really pick up those details on camera. I always find that having a nice glow or highlight on the model's skin tone will really help retain the texture even more so, and help the camera capture those little details too. And my last tip today revolves around using a higher shutter speed over a lower shutter speed to help retain that texture on the model's skin tone and really keep it in place. Now obviously for a lot of you, you probably already know that using a lower shutter speed is going to create a little bit of motion blur in your images from time to time. So if you're using a higher shutter speed, you generally have less chance of that happening, especially when you're shooting in natural light. Usually if you're shooting with strobes, you do kind of have that assistance from the lights to help you freeze that motion in place, but I do tend to recommend using a higher shutter speed if you really want to have as much texture in the skin as possible. So thank you guys so much for watching this video today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please click the subscribe button and the notification bell to make sure you see all the videos that I have coming up in future, and I will see you in the next video.